Okay, today we're going to be covering Chapter 11 of your Strayer textbook, which is about the beginnings of a new religion called Islam. And you should have a set of guided lecture notes that looks like this. Pull it off of the online classroom so that you can keep track of what we're talking about as we go along. We're actually going to be looking through 2 different PowerPoints today, so hopefully we can move through it fairly quickly though. I'll try to kind of fit it as closely with the Strayer textbook as I can. I reread it for you guys over the weekend, and hopefully this lecture will help you answer some of those guided reading questions. So the first thing that we need to understand is what the Arabian Peninsula was like before this new religion called Islam came into being. And a lot of it was populated by pastoralist nomads who lived with their animals that they domesticated out in the desert. There were cities because this area on the Arabian Peninsula was a really big trading area. If you look at where Arabia is on the map, it kind of connects up the Indian Ocean maritime system with the Mediterranean system. So what you had were a lot of nomadic tribes, and they were worshiping a huge variety of gods, kind of in the tradition of polytheism that we saw in a lot of other cultures. And these polytheistic tribes were not peaceful in any way. Okay, pastoralist groups, because they lacked a centralized state, had lacked also those kind of organized ways of fixing disputes. So instead, what would happen are like blood feuds. You can think of it almost like a camel buy, right? Like one group would ride by on their camels, and they'd pick off one of your guys, and so then you would have to ride by on your camels and take out one of their guys, and then it'd kind of become like a never-ending set of disputes. So it was very, very fragmented. In no way, shape, or form were these groups really unified. Their primary allegiance was to their tribal group, and that's what they were really focused on. So it was, again, fragmented, quite warlike. There were a lot of nomads, although there were some cities and a lot of trade. So that's kind of what the Arabian Peninsula looked like at the time. And this is a nice little setup right here. Down here is the entrance to the Red Sea. From over here is the Indian Ocean, right? And so caravan routes went up this way, boats went up this way, and then connected over to this huge port city of Alexandria in Egypt. And down here in modern day, what is today Yemen, there was this huge center of frankincense production, which was an aromatic resin. That basically means like tree sap that smelled good. And that resin was used in a lot of different worship ceremonies for a lot of different religions just because it smelled good. And if you remember from the biblical story, the baby Jesus is offered frankincense by the 3 wise men. So that's all referring to that huge trade route of frankincense that runs up this kind of left-hand spine of the Arabian Peninsula. And I want to point out this city right here, Mecca, and this city right here, Medina. These 2 cities are going to be the central focus of early Islamic society. Mecca is still the place where Muslims take their primary pilgrimage today, and Medina is of secondary importance, only second to Mecca. This is the city where the Prophet Muhammad really kind of formed his first real community of Islamic believers. So, backtracking a little bit further, I want to discuss with you guys Arabs' concept of their own genealogical heritage. And just like Hebrew or Jewish populations, Muslims trace their heritage back to the central figure in the early books of the Bible. In Genesis, the character Abraham. And Abraham has 2 different sons. Okay, he has a son called Isaac with his wife Sarah, and Isaac has a kid named Jacob. And from this lineage, traditionally speaking, the Hebrew people and the 12 tribes of Israel are supposed to descend. However, Abraham has another son. He has the son with actually a servant woman named Hagar. Sarah was really old and she wasn't able to produce a son. And so she said to Abraham, why don't you take Hagar and produce an heir for yourself? And so he did that, and he had a kid named Ishmael. And Arabs today traditionally view their heritage as stemming back to Abraham through this kid Ishmael and his mom Hagar. Now later on, Sarah actually conceived a son, Isaac, and so she had Abraham kick Hagar and Ishmael out. So the story doesn't end well for Ishmael, but that's some background for you guys. And I bring this up not because it's great to do Ancestry.com, but because the connection of Muslim believers, people who believe in Islam, back to the monotheistic faith of Judaism is very strong. And Strayer did a good job of pointing that out in the textbook. He kind of discussed the ideas that were prominent in the Arabian Peninsula during the lifetime of Muhammad, and how a lot of people were kind of viewing monotheism as perhaps the way that they wanted to go in terms of belief. And there's this really strong connection between Islam and Judaism and Christianity, because they're all kind of stemming from this historical genealogy that dates back to Abraham. Okay, there's also a really strong connection between these three monotheistic faiths of Judaism first, then Christianity, then Islam, through this thing called the prophetic tradition. And that just means the tradition of God's prophets. Okay, and prophets are people who sort of speak to humanity on behalf of God. And in Jewish tradition, you've got the main prophets up through Moses. I mean, there are a lot of other ones, but I'm trying to simplify here. So Adam, the first man, Noah of the flood, Abraham, who produced the 12 tribes of Israel and the tribes of Arabs, and then Moses, of 10 Commandments fame. Christians put Jesus onto that list not as a prophet, but as Messiah, so as a deity, or the deity. In Muslim tradition, Jesus is a prophet in the same line as these other guys. For Muslims, Jesus is not divine as he is for Christians. He is one in a series of prophets that ends with the last and most important prophet, who is Muhammad. And he's the guy that that first part of your Strayer chapter focuses on. So, again, the links between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are very strong. They kind of each view themselves as coming out of a common heritage, common genealogy, and common tradition. Okay, Mecca, the city, is a very important trading and religious city, and at its center is a large black cube called the Kaaba. And I want you to put a little llama beside the word Kaaba, or star it, or double underline it, or do something exciting around that word. That is a word, even though it's in Arabic, that you need to know. It just means cube in Arabic, so there's no magical meaning there. It just means cube. And it is a ginormous black cube. Okay, and that Kaaba is a shrine, and at the time that Muhammad was alive, it was a shrine with an enormous number of polytheistic deity statues that surrounded it. And it was a area where all of those warring tribes that lived in the Arabian Peninsula were required to have truce. And that's why Mecca was a major trading center. When the tribes came to Mecca to worship or to be near the deities of the Kaaba, they were not allowed to fight there. So that truce allowed trade to take place. In addition, the Arabian Peninsula itself, not just Mecca, but the Arabian Peninsula itself, is located smack dab between two really big and important empires. On the left of the Arabian Peninsula, to the west of the Arabian Peninsula, was an empire called the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire has a different name for us, but it's really just the eastern portion of the Roman Empire that continued after the western portion fell. And we'll talk more about that empire at a later chapter. They were also between this empire called the Sassanid Empire, and that was a reinvigorated Persian empire. Hopefully you guys remember that Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in the 300s BCE. The Sassanid Empire, of course this is in the CE time range, was around in, say, the 5, 6, 700s CE. All right. So Muhammad is born into this very complex society with all kinds of different tribal norms and trade and religious influences. And he was a kind of thoughtful person, I think, and he began going up into the hills around Mecca, up into kind of caves in the desert, and he would just go there and kind of hang out and think. And in about the year 610, he began having a series of revelations. In accordance with Muslim tradition, the angel Gabriel came down from heaven and commanded Muhammad to recite. And that's sort of the famous line. He just says to Muhammad, recite. And then out of Muhammad comes the words that will eventually become the Quran, which is the holy text of the Islamic religion. And Muhammad, in that recitation that eventually becomes the Quran, the holy book, he completely rejects all of the gods of the Kaaba, and he gives his allegiance to one God, which is Allah. And Allah just means God in Arabic. It's the word God, but in the Arabic language. And this God for Muhammad was kind of synonymous with the Yahweh of the Old Testament, or the Hebrews, the ancient Jews' deity. And Muhammad's belief was that there is only one God, and this is the one. So that's sort of his big revelation. Now, this revelation of Muhammad creates a lot of tension within the town of Mecca, because in addition to him wanting to have only one deity, he also wanted a more just and equal society, and that wasn't very attractive to rich and powerful people within Mecca. So eventually his followers are kicked out of town in an event called the Hijra, and I want you to put a little llama or a star beside that word Hijra. And you could just define it out to the side if you would. The Hijra is the flight of the flight of Muhammad and his followers out of Mecca to Medina. So it's the flight of Muhammad and his followers out of Mecca into Medina, and this took place in the year 622. 622 is the first year of the Islamic calendar. So if you want to know what year it is in a predominantly Muslim country like Saudi Arabia, traditionally the calendar goes from the advent of this event, the Hijra, in the year 622. So basically Muhammad was a really big threat to the established powers in Mecca. If, for example, he was going to strike down all the polytheistic idols around the Kaaba, then what would happen to the ability of Mecca to be a trading center or a place of truce where people came together and stopped fighting? So there were a lot of reasons that he got kicked out, and that was those are just a couple. All right. The Quran, I think that we just talked about this a little bit. It is the holy book of Islam. It calls for the creation of a new society, or ummah. Ummah means community, and it refers to the Muslim community, specifically people who follow this new religion, Islam. And the goal is for it to be based on justice. And again, the Quran has a very special position in Muslim belief and in Muslim practice, because remember the angel said to Muhammad just to recite. So the belief is that the words that are exiting Muhammad's mouth are not just Muhammad's words. He's not just writing down what he thinks about God. He's actually just kind of the mouthpiece of God. And so the Quran becomes sacred in a really significant way, not just as Muhammad's words, but as God's words. Muhammad also builds up his new Ummah, or Islamic community, based on 5 main practices. So the 5 pillars of Islam are 5 practices, and you might want to just jot out to the side 5 practices. So these are 5 things that all observant Muslims are supposed to do. The first one is to declare their faith, and so that's a really simple one. So the idea is that Allah is the only God and Muhammad is his main messenger. So that's the kind of core belief of the Islamic tradition. And I'd like you to jot out to the side of this bullet point that monotheism is the main point of Islam. Monotheism is the main point of Islam. Early Muslims critiqued, for example, the Christian belief in the Trinity. And they felt that it wasn't true monotheism. So there's like a pullback to really ardent monotheism. All right, the second one is the Salat, and this is just prayers. And Muslims are supposed to pray 5 times each day throughout the day, and it's a pretty interactive process. I think in Christian tradition, people are used to just sort of bowing their head and praying, but in Muslim tradition, prayer is more like a full body experience. So there's a prostration process where you have to get down on your knees and put your forehead to the floor. And the word Islam means submission. And the goal is to submit your will to God's will, to submit fully to God. So that process of praying, where people are, fully down on their knees and have their head to the ground, is kind of an outward symbol of that submission that's supposed to be happening in their lives to God's will. Muslims are required to wash before they pray, so water systems are going to become really, really important in the Arab Empire that follows the advent of Islam. Muslims also have to face Mecca during this process of praying. And most Muslims use a little rug because, again, you're going to be down on the ground doing this process. And you can actually look for it, maybe if you have a smartphone, you can probably download a free Mecca direction app. It's a real thing, and it'll just help you point toward Mecca from wherever you are on the globe. And Muslims got really good at a lot of mathematical and map-making technology, because they were working very hard to make sure that people knew the direction of Mecca no matter where they were on the Earth's surface. So anyway, look for the Mecca direction app on your iPhone if you've got one. So there's Muslims in the act of prayer, and you can see what I was talking about. It's a really full body enterprise, and it's also important to note in this picture you can see maybe that there are only men on this section, and I think it makes sense if you are thinking about this process of Muslim worship. You're not going to want to have men and women all kind of mixed together, because you're kneeling all the way down and it might be a little bit awkward. So the next one is still about that process of prayer. There are a couple Arabic words that we need to be familiar with. First is muezzin. A muezzin is a person who gives the call to prayer from the minaret. And I have on right over here a big picture of a minaret, and you can see how high above the town it is. So the muezzin used to, back in the day, have to climb up all these stairs 5 times a day and give the call to prayer, so to let the people know that it was time to pray. Today, of course, they use modern projection systems for your voice. And Muslims have an official, more formal worship service in a mosque, which is the Muslim building for worship on Fridays. So in Christian tradition, I think most people are used to going to the church on Sunday, and in the Islamic world, you go to the mosque on Friday. All right, the next one is about giving. So Muslims, and based on the teachings of Muhammad, are really into making sure that all people in the society are provided for. And Muslims are required each year to give away 2.5% of their total wealth. And Some people might be familiar with something called a tithe, which is the practice of in Judaism and in Christianity of giving away 10% of your yearly income. So this is a kind of equivalent measure, but it's 2.5% of your total wealth. So depending on how wealthy you are, it could be more than a tithe or it could be less. All right, the fourth, fasting during the holy month of Ramadan. There's a whole month set aside, and this is a lunar month based on the cycles of the moon, so for about 28 days, when Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. And it's a time of kind of reflection, sort of similar to the Christian tradition of the time period before Easter called Lent, if you're familiar with that. And possibly the most famous of the 5 practices or pillars of Islam is the Hajj. And this is the pilgrimage to Mecca. Muslims have to do this pilgrimage at least once in their lifetime, and about 2 to 3 million Muslims make the Hajj each year. You only need to do it once. It's not a requirement, but it is strongly encouraged if you have the financial resources. People want to participate in that. And in the background of this picture, you can see this big black cube. This is the Kaaba, and you can see that people are circling the Kaaba. And during the Hajj week, at the end of the week, people circle the Kaaba 7 times. And when we watch the video tomorrow, you'll see why they're circling that mosque. So that's a better picture of it. This is the mosque in Mecca in modern-day Saudi Arabia, and you can see there's people all the way out to the edge of the picture, and they're circling the mosque, or I'm sorry, they're circling that black cube, which is the Kaaba. So it's a huge event. You can imagine if you've got a few million people circling something all at once. All right. This little bit of actually, let me see. Actually, we'll skip that just for now because we're going to get to it in just a second. Sorry. I want you to check out this map briefly. Everything that is in orange and red right across here is primarily an Islamic area. And you can see this other really strong influence in Indonesia. And right here, up through Pakistan into Central Asia, all of this, reaching into parts of China, and then across North Africa and down into East Africa. And this kind of gives you a better sense of where Muslims actually live in the world. And I wanted to point this out because Arabs, which is an ethnic group, Arabs are an ethnic group. They only make up 20% of the total Muslim population in the world. And Strayer talks quite a bit in this chapter about Arabization versus Islamization. So adopting Arab culture versus adopting Islamic culture. And there's a really distinct difference between those two things, right? So, for example, Persia, the Sassanid Empire, which was eventually conquered by Muslims, is still going to use their native language of Persian. They're not going to adopt the Arabic language. That's an example of becoming Muslim without really adopting the culture of the Arabian Peninsula. So you can see right here, Indonesia is today's the country in the world today with the most Muslims, followed by Pakistan and India, both in South Asia, and Bangladesh, also in South Asia. Turkey is in what's usually referred to as the Near East, right? It borders the Mediterranean. And then finally, you see a Middle Eastern country with Iran. This is a past question from an AP test. In what region of the world do the largest number of Muslims live? And of course the answer is, based on that chart that you just looked at, drumroll, South and Southeast Asia. So just make sure that that's familiar to you, because I think that's a very popular misconception, is that Muslims are only Arabs. Okay. All right. Islam spreads for a huge variety of reasons. First of all, it's very easy to learn and practice. There's 5 pillars. If you can count to 5, then you can, remember the different practices that you're supposed to do in Islam. There is not a priesthood, so it's a really kind kind of, at least in the beginning, it lacked a very strong hierarchy, which made it very attractive to the lower classes. It teaches equality, which is a common trait it has with both Buddhism and Christianity, one of the reasons that those two religions spread so quickly as well. There is one body of law called Sharia law, and Strayer is going to talk a lot about Sharia law, and it's a really strong unifier among Muslims, and it makes Islam a really attractive religion to empires because they want to be able to run their empire well, and what better way to run your empire well than have a ready-made law code. Non-Muslims are allowed religious freedom, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, as long as they pay this additional tax, and you'll read about that in Strayer as well. And of course it's portable along trade routes, just like the other religions that we've talked about. Last but not least, and put a little star beside this one, the Byzantine and the Sassanid Persian empires nearby them were already weak. They'd kind of fought one another for a large number of years, and it allowed them to be conquered fairly easily, or at least parts of them fairly easily. All right, we're going to flick to the other PowerPoint, and we're going to talk about not so much the Islamic religion, but the first empires of Muslims. So, all right. The first thing that you need to fill in is that big square where it says the Dar al-Islam. The Dar al-Islam just means the unity found across Muslim areas supported by their common practices, or the 5 pillars. And this is a really important concept in the College Board. They really want that to be apparent to you, that one of the reasons that Islamic civilization is so enduring, even though some of these empires are not as enduring, is because of these common practices. You can kind of think of it how you did China, right? When the Han dynasty falls, it's not as though Confucianism goes away. It's still there because culturally the practices and beliefs of Confucianism are strong. And in the same way, Islamic practices are consistent. So if you have a Muslim government, that's all well and good, but if you don't happen to have a Muslim government, those 5 pillars and those common practices will still retain a huge amount of unity across all areas that adopt Islam. So there's your 5 pillars. Strangely in a Greek temple format. Okay. Down in the lower right, you can see a little map. And this is toward the end of the unified period, so it's all in different colors because the unified Arab Empire had broken up by that point. However, all of these areas at one point were unified under one government. Now, this all happens with the death of Muhammad. He dies in Mecca in 632. And there's a lot of division over who should lead the Ummah, or the Islamic community, after the death of Muhammad. And his kind of right-hand man, Abu Bakr, wins out that election. And he doesn't win unanimously, however. So in order to kind of pull all of the Muslims together in a common venture, what he decides to do is have a goal of conquest. And so Muslims are going to be fantastically successful in their first 100 years. They're going to conquer the single largest empire to date for that period in just a really short time period. So they're very wildly successful. This is a little bit better picture of it. So you can see in the early period, this is actually during the lifetime of Muhammad. These areas in dark red were brought under Muslim control. Soon all these sort of dark pink areas, and then finally the light pink areas, and this light pink area actually extends over here into Central Asia. Alright, there are a lot of different motives for conquest, but a lot of it has to do with bringing unity to a lot of internal fighting. So in order to kind of quell that internal fighting and unify, Muslims went out and began conquering. Of course there was a religious motive as well, in order to kind of spread the religion, but at least at first, and this is an important point to note, so I'd like you to star it, at least at first, Muslims discouraged conversions. the viewpoint very early on was sort of that Arabs had a special connection in terms of their access to God through Muhammad and his revelations. And so it was kind of viewed as an Arab exclusive movement. Muslims, early Arab Muslims, were also promised a share of booty. And I know that sounds funny, but booty is just the wealth and just physical stuff that you take from people when you conquer them. And one of the primary ways to get people to go and conquer others is to say, when we conquer them, we'll take their stuff and we'll divide it amongst our group. And that was a really primary way of motivating people to go out and conquer all of this stuff. One of the reasons that Arabs wanted to avoid mass conversions wasn't only because of that idea of having that special connection to being Arab and being Muslim, but also the more followers of Islam you get, the more divisions of any conquest booty you have to do. So that wasn't, terribly motivating. In addition, non-Muslims were taxed at a higher rate than Muslims were. So that was a really strong motivator, really not to convert the population. Also, very early on, there grew to be a division that today is forms the two major sects of Islam. So the idea is who should lead the Muslim community, and the first four caliphs, Strayer also talks about this in the textbook, are sort of all agreed on, or at least mostly people agreed on those first four caliphs. And if you want to circle that word caliph and write the meaning out to the side, the caliph just refers to the person who politically and religiously leads the Muslim community. The caliph is the person who both politically and religiously leads the Muslim community. Make sure that you jot that out to the side. That's an important distinction. For example, the Roman emperor was never really viewed as a religious leader. He was just a political leader. The caliph is a really powerful position. It actually has a term. It's called a Caesaro-Papist ruler, which means that you combine both the power of the state and the power of religion into one person's hands, and that's really what a caliph is. So the first four are pretty well agreed on, and it gets a little bit messy after that. And I won't go into this with too much detail, but the early caliphs were not able to really fully pull everyone together with them, and there were some people who thought that a particular family, which was related to Muhammad's family, should be the official caliphs, and other people disagreed. They thought that it should be the decision of the community at large, and it shouldn't be a position that was exclusive to Muhammad's family. And that position, that the caliph does not need to be in Muhammad's family, is the one that really wins the day. And those Muslims today are called Sunnis. And the other set of Muslims are called Shias or Shiites. And they felt that Muhammad's relatives were the rightful caliphs. And they're a minority view today, although there's still a lot of Shiites in the world, including the majority Shiite nation of Iran today. But most Muslims are part of literally the majority, or the Sunni. And I just felt that the Ummah, where the community should choose the caliph, and it doesn't necessarily need to be within Muhammad's family. So again, the Sunni Shia split is about who should lead the Muslim community, Muhammad's family or some guy that the community decides on, not necessarily Muhammad's family. All right. The first set of Islamic empires that really gets going is the Arab Islamic Empire of the Umayyads. And they were hugely expansionist. They conquered almost all that stuff that we saw in reds and pinks just a little bit earlier. They have a capital at Damascus, which is in modern Syria, and it was definitely an Arab conquest state. They didn't really view themselves as a inclusive society. It was about being Arab. So if they had a little t-shirt, those t-shirts that say I love New York on them, the Umayyads t-shirt. Draw a little t-shirt out to the side of your Umayyad, okay? So draw a little t-shirt. You drawn it? All right, good. You got your little t-shirt. Make it say, I heart Arabs. That's what the Umayyads t-shirt says, okay? They had an Arab elite which ruled over non-Arab, non-Muslim populations, and it went so far that they really segregated themselves into garrison towns or military towns to prevent mixing with non-Arab members of their empire. So again, their little t-shirt, I heart Arabs. There's their capital complex, obviously, it's super cool. All right. Now, there are minorities within the empire, which of course are not Muslim, because again, conversion was not really encouraged at this very early time period. And there were people of the book, and the book refers to really the Old Testament. Christians and Jews, to a certain extent Zoroastrians, were thought to be people of the book. So they were kind of protected populations. They were sort of, remember the common heritage of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So they were protected people, and they paid an extra tax, but their religion was tolerated. If you converted during this period to Islam, but you were not an Arab, you still had to pay that extra tax, so that was a big beef for non-Arab converts to Islam. So consequently, you're not going to have very many conversions. It wasn't encouraged, it wasn't really beneficial, and most Arabs kind of stayed secluded from their non-Arab conquered people. In addition, at least at the beginning, you've got a decent status for women in terms of the religion. The idea was that all souls were equal. Strayer quotes a few passages from the Quran that kind of back this idea up. Women tended to be active in commerce. Muhammad's wife, Khadija, was a trader, a merchant herself, and of course there was some pastoralism in their background, and pastoralists tend to be more equal toward women. However, over time, just like the other major religions, the religion of Islam becomes more patriarchal, and Strayer does a really nice job of describing that in the textbook. I don't think that I had a reading question that went with it, but that doesn't mean not to read that section. It just means that you didn't have to write down anything in particular. Make sure that you look at that section of the book and kind of understand how that status declined over time. All right. Eventually, the Umayyads decline, and it really doesn't take very long for them to fall to a revolt led by a family called the Abbasids. And non-Arab converts and Shiites, who were both disgruntled by Umayyad rule, join in with this Abbasid revolt. And the Abbasids have a really cool empire. They moved the capital to Baghdad, and they had conquered Persia, and so they're going to kind of imitate Persian culture and government structures because Persian structures were so old and so good. You know, Persia had been an empire since 500 BCE, so they've got 1,000 years of experience. So Arabs who had not really had a lot of practice governing a huge empire imitate the people that they conquered in Persia. Let's see. Oh, I put the vizier up here, just I think that you'll like this. If you remember Jafar from the Disney movie Aladdin, he was the Grand Vizier. Vizier is a real title in the Islamic world. It's just the chief advisor to the caliph. Okay. Now, the Abbasid Empire is definitely an Islamic empire rather than an Arab empire. Non-Arab converts to Islam are fully integrated into the population, and opportunities for education and government positions are opened up to those people. There are a ton of conversions during this era because, again, it becomes advantageous. And as Strayer pointed out, there are a lot of attractive qualities about Islam, not least of which is the fact that Muslims were conquering everybody. So it kind of led people to believe that perhaps their religion was the correct one. God was on their side. They were able to conquer all these people. The Abbasid economy and culture was very urban. There were a lot of cities, and there was a lot of exchange. The Hajj allows really fast idea exchange, right? Muslims from all over this huge Abbasid Caliphate would come to Mecca once a year, and anything that happened on one end of the empire would be known at the other end of the empire through that common experience of the Hajj. And he also had a huge proliferation of schools called madrasas. And the most important center of learning, which was called the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, put a giant star or a big llama beside the House of Wisdom. This was an area where scholars came together to not really almost, just basically like a modern university. There was a hospital, there were scholars, there were translators, there were mathematicians, astronomy, pretty much you name it, and the House of Wisdom in Baghdad had it going on in terms of academics. At the House of Wisdom, ancient authors were translated, especially Greek authors like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. So a lot of what we know about those really ancient Greek important philosophers comes to us through the translations that were preserved by Arabs during this time period. All right. Just like all other empires, the Abbasids will eventually overexpand, and because you're not in the modern period, it becomes very difficult to hold the empire together. Caliphs begin hiring personal armies to protect them from Central Asia. And there is an ethnic group called Turks. Okay, Turks live in Central Asia. Okay, so Turkic people are from Central Asia, and everybody knows that pastoralists are pretty hardcore. So if you were looking for some bodyguards, it makes sense to go get some pastoralists. And so Turkic pastoralists, Central Asians, pretty much serve the caliphs as slave soldiers. And this is a really unique attribute of these Islamic empires, that they have slaves as their main fighting force. The centralization began to break down, and eventually Mamluk and Seljuk Turkic slave soldiers begin to run the government, and the caliph becomes a figurehead. And finally, with the Mongols in 1258, the last caliph is kind of horrifyingly rolled into a carpet and trampled to death by Mongol horses. And that ended the Abbasid empire. However, it does not end Islamic civilization, and Islamic civilization will continue long past that, especially as these Turkic groups convert to Islam and form empires of their own in the next time period.